Hey guys, what's up? I'm Noah, this is Analog Resurgence, and today I'm doing a roll review on Lomography's 800 ISO color negative film. Lomography's 800 ISO film is stuff that I'm seeing become more and more popular recently. If you're not familiar, Lomography is a company that makes a variety of different film and cameras, usually leaning more towards the experimental film and the toy camera side of things. Black and white, color, weird, experimental, purple stuff. There's people that really like Lomography stuff and people that really probably hate Lomography stuff. I fall probably somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of Lomography stuff that I'm not super interested in, or I'm hesitant to kind of buy because usually this stuff is expensive. I have to order it and I can't get it locally anywhere for a lot of it. And it's usually, again, more experimental stuff or something that is a bit more of an acquired taste. But Lomography's 800 ISO color negative stuff is pretty standard stuff as far as films go. So Lomo 800 is a film that's available in 35mm, but also in medium format 120. And it's also quite cheap. I mean, of course, depending on where you are and what's available to you, but it does sort of fill like an empty gap in terms of consumer style 800 ISO films. Because right now there's not like a Kodak or Fuji 800 ISO consumer film out there. This is stuff like Fuji C200 and Color Plus 200 from Kodak, and then Ultramax 400 and Superior 400. But there's not like an 800 ISO, like cheap color negative film from Kodak or Fuji to kind of fill that gap. And Lomo 800 is not like a pro film like Ektar or Portra, but it does kind of share a lot of the characteristics of like a consumer film. And that's probably because a lot of the time Lomography buys film from somewhere else and then rebrands it under their own name. Sure, stuff like Metropolis and Purple is like Lomography's own creation, but stuff like this is most likely from Kodak. See, Kodak makes this. It's a disposable camera that's loaded with 800 ISO color negative film inside of it. Except that outside of that, Kodak doesn't actually sell like a cheap consumer level 800 ISO film, which means that most likely Lomography is buying that stuff in bulk and then cutting it down to medium format and 35mm film and selling it as Lomography 800, which is fine. I mean, a ton of people out there are rebranding film all the time. Lomography, film photography project, not everybody has the facilities and the ability to manufacture film itself from scratch. A lot of the time it's easier to source it from other places, put your name on it and sell it as your own. So I decided to shoot this roll of Lomo 800 in 120 medium format on my recently acquired Mamiya Universal camera. Now, if you guys want to see me do a video specifically on the Mamiya Universal and talking about this camera and kind of exactly, you know, all the ins and outs of it, then you can let me know about that as well. You can also see samples of this stuff and samples of other stuff that I've shot over on the Patreon as well. There's a link in the description. But let's take a look at all of this stuff. First of all, the Mamiya Universal film holder that I have shoots a 6x9 sized exposure when I'm shooting 120 in the camera, which means that I only get 8 frames on the roll. So these shots are bigger than 35mm and more detailed because of that, but you're going to encounter similar characteristics between 35 and medium format when you're shooting this stuff yourself. And the immediate characteristics of this stuff, again, are just like Kodak's consumer stuff. There's lots of contrast without me having to do really any editing, and there's also a lot of saturation that's also pretty much kind of built into these images. This definitely isn't something like Portra 800 that has like a much more muted, much less contrasty look to it. Because it's an 800 ISO, it's very flexible for use in lower light if you aren't outside, which is why a lot of people are probably drawn to it. Right now, there's no Kodak or Fuji 800 ISO stuff that you can pick up for cheap, which means that if you want to shoot 800 ISO stuff for color negative, then a lot of the time you end up using Portra 800 for just casual shooting. This stuff looks pretty good though. It does have a warmth to it that's similar to the Ultramax and Gold stuff, and it definitely looks very much in line with those two stocks. Now I did shoot this in 120 and my frames are big, which is why the grain looks small. But remember, it's an 800 ISO film, and on a smaller frame size of a 35mm roll, there's gonna be noticeable grain, especially because it's not designed like a fine grained professional film that would be smoother. It's really nothing fancy, and ultimately it does kind of fill like an empty spot in the lineup of like cheaper, more consumer friendly films. Also, for shooting 120 in particular, there's not typically like that selection of consumer films. Gold, Color Plus, Ultramax, Superior, and C200 are all cheap films that are only available in 35mm. And I understand that like a consumer selection for a medium format is way less important because it is more of like a higher quality, more expensive format to get into. But having like something like Lomography 800 as an option for something that isn't Portra 800 and is a little bit cheaper as well for 120 is a lot of fun to be able to have. I like that this is an option for shooting in medium format. I can buy a single roll of Lomo 800 in 120 here in Toronto for about $10, whereas a single roll of Portra 800 in 120 will cost me like $15 to $18. Unfortunately, of course, not everybody has access to Lomography stuff locally, and of course a lot of people have to go through ordering it online through Lomography's shop or the Film Photography Project shop or somebody else, which can maybe bring the price of this stuff up and maybe make it not as worthwhile. I had fun shooting it. I'll probably buy it again and shoot more of it. I mean, primarily in 120, but you know, that's just me, and if you're not interested, again, just don't pick this stuff up. But I'll give it a thumbs up. I never rate the films, do I? Thank you guys so much for checking this out, and you know, let me know if you've been shooting the Lomography stuff, what you guys think about this stuff, if you have your experiences shooting it in 35 and 120. Also, yes, if you want to hear me talk about, you know, this beast here, that is about a month or so old, then I can do that as well in the future, probably coming up at some point. There's links in the description for the Patreon, of course, if you want to see more of this stuff and support me so that you can see more of this stuff anyways. Also some different links for buying some of this Lomo 800 stuff for yourselves, as well as links for Pro 8mm in California if you're interested in Super 8 or 16, or if that stuff is your jam instead of this stuff. Whatever your jam is, have a good time. I will see you guys later, and thanks for watching.